Without further ado, I would like to introduce my old friend and tonight's moderator, Chris Hacker, Chief Design Officer for Johnson & Johnson, who will in turn introduce each of the speakers this evening. When I explained to Chris that we, the nation's design museum, and let me stress, the nation's only design museum, were eager to react to Haiti and help with the aftermath, if at all possible, Chris jumped at the opportunity. He leads all creative processes for brand identity, packaging design, and brand imagery for Johnson & Johnson. And his real passion is bringing awareness to designers of their power in the world to make a difference and to make sustainable and socially responsible design. He was the catalyst behind making sustainable projects for J&J like Band-Aid, Aveeno, Johnson's Baby Products, and the terrific new first aid kit, which is a favorite of mine. Welcome, Chris.
Thank you, Carolyn. Nice to be here. I think, again, I'll thank you for coming out on a horrible night. But I want to start by having us just think for a second about the catastrophe that happened about a month ago, and the notion of sitting quietly in a house somewhere in Port-au-Prince at 4:30 and having by 5:05 have that house have crumbled around you and all of your loved ones and your families and your friends in a disaster that I think is palpable in a country that has not had an easy life. So I think we're going to have an interesting discussion tonight, but I think we need to put this in the context of that crisis and try to think about what we can do as designers and human beings to try to help that process. So let me get to it and introduce the panelists. We have an interesting group of people with us tonight, starting with Pierre Fouche, who I'll have everybody stand when I call their name, if they would. We're gonna start this, by the way, by having a couple of presentations, and then we'll have a panel up here. But I want to introduce everybody first. So Pierre comes to us. He is Haitian and is a PhD candidate at the University of Buffalo in applied sciences and engineering, and is studying earthquakes. So I think his personal history is going to be interesting for us to hear. We were talking earlier about his family and how they're doing in Haiti, and his plan ultimately to go back to Haiti and kind of help in earthquake engineering and preparedness. He studied civil engineering at the University of Quisqueya in Haiti, and he's developing strategies for natural disasters. So he'll talk to us in a few minutes. Our next panel is Anna Muoio, who is a principal at Design Continuum in Boston, and is an old friend and colleague from a couple of projects, most recently Aspen Design Conference. What do we call it? What did we call it? Design Summit, which was actually an interesting moment in that it was about trying to help solve some of these kinds of problems. Anna leads the Continuum Social Innovation Initiative, and she was telling me before the meeting that there's been a change in the process at Continuum and making this idea of social initiative a deeper part of what Continuum is working on, which is a very cool thing. I have a similar experience to Anna, and she mentioned that many of the young designers that work in Continuum are interested in developing work that makes their social involvement and conscience part of what they do. Many of us grew up as designers, and we were asked to solve Fortune 500 companies' problems rather than trying to help solve the world's problems. And I think the work that Anna is doing in that light is pretty compelling. I think the other interesting thing about Anna is that you were the number 14th, is that right? Member of the Fast Company staff back when Fast Company was not on anybody's radar screen, and so she was part of that startup, and I think interesting. Her involvement in these kinds of topics, I think, is going to make her an interesting part of the panel. Next, we have Gerald Martone, who is the Director of Humanitarian Affairs at the International Rescue Committee. Want to stand up, Jerry? I didn't ask Anna to stand up, by the way. That's Anna. Forgive me. Jerry is actively involved in the New York headquarters of International Rescue Committee, and he was telling me earlier that he's deeply involved in policy after 10 years of being on the ground, and he's going to, I think, tell us a bit more about that. But he was in places like Burundi, Liberia, Kosovo, Chechnya, Congo, Sierra Leone, Rwanda, East Timor. You can just see those crises building up, and I'm not sure how you do that for 10 years, but I'm sure we'll hear some of the kind of process there. I think one of the interesting things about the discussion we're going to have is that there's some point of view about design and design activity in this space, and we'll get into that a little bit more. But I think there'll be some disagreement about that, so that should make it interesting. Jess Meeus, and I should have learned how to pronounce your name. Meeus, is that correct? Is the emergency coordinator. Please stand up. He's just returned from 2 weeks in Haiti, so I'm sure he's going to give us the most current view of what's been going on. He's Belgian. Since '92, he's been involved in the kind of logistics and helping in crises places, and he was telling me a little bit about some of the work that he's been doing. He's based in Copenhagen and has since 2008 been involved in UNICEF's work. I think there's a lot to be learned about how we as a society can help people in crisis, and I think Jess is going to tell us a little bit about that. We're going to have two presentations to start this off. And we're going to start with Jess, who is going to give us a little bit of an overview of what's going on right now in Haiti, and then we'll hear a bit from Pierre about the process of engineering in earthquake land. So, Jess.
Thank you for the introduction. Okay, I'm talking. One thing about the earthquake, about what you can see is the footage of 1 month after the earthquake, the onset of the earthquake in Haiti. What makes different this earthquake compared to other ones is that it strikes the major infrastructure of the country. So in other major natural or man-made disaster was remotely out of the capital. This one, everything was flattened. The government was inactive because everything was destroyed. The problem of Haiti is that on the top of the first natural disaster, the earthquake 1 month, 6 weeks ago, we might face a second major natural disaster. Is the hurricane season that's going to come up in a couple of months. So that's why finding solution, having a good coordination to help the affected population is really important for us. So I'm going to show you some footages of what happens at the moment. In this footage, you will see some key elements of commodities we're using. All the actors, everybody in the humanitarian world use the same commodities. And that's why talking to a panel like you is really interesting. Since years and years, we use the same commodities. Now, we're thinking always the same problem. We are used to our commodities. So now having other people looking at our reality, looking at how we use this, and coming with new ideas help us to be better and to help better the people with better commodities that we have now on the market or in the future market, thanks to you.
You're watching UNICEF television. A month after a magnitude 7 earthquake devastated large parts of the country, Haitians have entered a symbolic 3 days of reflection, 3 days originally set aside for the annual carnival, Haitians reflect instead on the 210,000 lives lost, the 300,000 people injured, and the 1.2 million people displaced. They reflect on the destruction of their homes, their towns, and their capital city. But a massive aid effort is underway to assist Haiti's devastated population. Despite losing its own office and storage facilities in the quake, UNICEF was quick to respond and has been hard at work along with NGO partners and government to provide support wherever possible.
For us, for UNICEF, we're working in different areas: nutrition, health, water and sanitation, protection, education. So we have a panel of approximately 10,000 items. On the emergency supply list, we have 200 items. So it goes for water bladder. It was the flat tank. You had like also recreation kit. A recreation kit is a box with toys, sports, games and things like this, because we're trying to get the children out of the focus of the disaster. We have school education kits. A school has been damaged, we bring the tent to have a classroom, we bring new education material, we have blackboards. We're trying to be innovative, and because blackboards are big, so we have black paint and we paint the walls and things like this. So it goes for vaccination item. UNICEF is one of the major providers. We cover 56% of the vaccines worldwide. So we have all these commodities. It goes from the laptop, from the telecommunication system for us to communicate, to the pencils, to pots and pans and things like this. So it's really all kind of commodities.
Once someone has arrived here and see by himself, with his own eyes, the level of the situation with the people on the ground, and also a country which I think was really much a month ago on its knees, now is really flat out. So what UNICEF has been focusing in the first days is on survival. We've been able to rush up very quickly the water supply, which has been our main life-saving activity, and this is being supplemented by food with WFP and other activities. So that's a very good combination of life-saving measures.
1 month on, over 900,000 people are receiving clean water every day at 300 sites across Port-au-Prince, Léogâne and Jacmel. Latrines and showers have been and are continuing to be built in camps throughout the affected areas. Within the coming weeks, over 3,000 latrines will have been built by UNICEF and partners Oxfam, CARE and the Red Cross in Port-au-Prince alone. 1 month on, the impact of the quake continues to shake those who survived it. Through the massive population displacement, malnutrition rates, high at the best of times, are expected to rise. So UNICEF and partners have opened or reopened 81 facilities catering to the outpatient treatment of severe acute malnutrition, while nutrition partner WFP has, through systematic food distribution, provided 2 weeks' worth of food to an estimated 2 million Haitians. UNICEF, in partnership with the Ministry of Health, has also launched a countrywide immunization campaign to circumvent the spread of disease in the cramped informal settlements. The campaign targets children under 7 and vaccinates against measles, rubella, tetanus and diphtheria.
The humanitarian response will continue for some time, there's no doubt about that. Reaching out to 216 camps, 400,000 people, 500,000 people. It remains, as I'm speaking today, 1 month after, remains a big challenge, not only for UNICEF, for the whole international community.
Beyond basic survival, UNICEF's core concern has been the safety of children, either orphaned or separated from their families during the quake.
One of the things that we did is we have our commitment, we have our niche, we have our mandate. One of the things we did just after the emergency, we had different activities. We had a measles campaign. So we sent syringes and vaccines, and we succeeded to vaccinate 100 children in less than a month, 100,000 children, sorry. So, and we're working in this kind of difficult access. This is a school. So the problem for us is to identify the needs, but also to be able to maneuver. Pierre can explain a little bit later how is Haiti, but Haiti is a city. So it has been flattened, and we have to work through the debris of the houses to bring commodities to the people. So that's also being innovative in transport and once again having as less as commodities possible to reach as much people as possible. This is our country director.
This is a major challenge we have ahead because all school activities have been interrupted, not only in the earthquake-affected areas, but also in the rest of the country due to a state of emergency and due to the heavy migration of populations outside Port-au-Prince.
Our major objective is this: getting the focus out of the trauma. This is bringing the supplies as soon as possible so that children can go back to life. This is their life somehow. It's going to remain like this for a while. So we have to bring them back to school. We have to bring them back to reality. That is why it's important for us to be as soon as possible on the spot with as much as commodity as possible to bring them a certain reality back. And I think Pierre, with his experience of the country, can explain a little bit what they're facing, but it's not an easy situation for them, and certainly for the children. This is one of our solution is a temporary storage capacity. Our warehouse has been destroyed. So we bring in this kind of tents that we call the rub hole, but it's a brand, so I'm sorry to use it. And we erect 10 of them, so it's 240 square meters each, to bring as much as possible commodities. We bring commodities from different locations, from Panama, from Miami, from Santo Domingo. We truck them down and then we try to distribute. One of the solutions for us was we have water trucks. We bring water back to different locations, to different tanks, is to operate and to refill the tanks at night because we don't have congestion on the roads. So we're trying also in our way to be a little bit innovative and to think about new ways to bring supplies. This is one of 5 boxes and that represents a tent. And it's a school tent. It's a 72 square meter tent. The whole tent, it's 800 kilos. It is really nice what happens in emergency because everybody wants to help. So all the children were coming down, everybody was coming down, carrying the boxes with us. One day after, the school was open, and that's why we do it. Many people ask me why I do this job. I relate in 1996, as Jerry, I was in Sierra Leone and Liberia. We opened a road. There was a village that was surrounded by militaries. And we negotiated with the militaries, the 23 years old kids that have big machine guns to impress you. We negotiated with them, we gave food, and we had access to a population. There was a young girl, 2-3 years old. She was suffering from kwashiorkor is basically this kid that you see with a big belly. It's malnutrition, severe malnutrition. We brought some nutrition commodities, therapeutic food. After 2 months, she jumped in my arms. That's why we do it. That's to see a school opening after 2 weeks, that's why we do it. To have a vaccination campaign, that's why we do it. That's why we want to interact with you to see kind of how we can be even better with new commodities, with new systems, and bringing all this commodity as soon as possible after the onset of the emergency or the earthquake. Pierre, over to you.
What I'm going to talk about is going to be helpful to put into context what has happened back home, and this is going also, and this can also help to generate new ideas about how we can go back and help better. And I think it's very important to understand what were the conditions back home just before the earthquakes, and from that point we can move forward and try to evaluate what are the different options that we have in order to rebuild and to rebuild in such a way that we do not see such disasters in the future. And one of the first things that I'm showing right now is the physical situation of the country as related to earthquake. What we are seeing here is a country that is very, if I can use that word, a broken country. Broken in the sense that we have several fault lines crossing the countries, and because we have so many fault lines crossing the countries, we are potentially are exposed to earthquakes. It has happened before. This is not the first time that we are having earthquakes in the country. We have had earthquakes about 250 years ago in the same area of Port-au-Prince that you can see right here. And like in 1842, we have had earthquake also in my hometown, which is up here. It is not showing on the picture right here. The city is called Cape Haitian, and at the time we lost about 10,000 people. So this is not very new in terms of a natural disaster that can happen in the country. But at the same time, the problem is it has happened such a long time ago. The people were completely forgot about it, and we were not prepared. So because we were not prepared and we didn't know about the history in terms of earthquakes, so we were like much more exposed than another country, which has like the financial means in order like to face such disaster. What I'm showing here is just like an historical map of different earthquakes that we have had in the country before. And you can see it's distributed basically all over the place. On that side, we have the Dominican Republic, and they are affected, or they can be affected also. But if you look on the left side of the map, you can see where we have had earthquakes before. And some of those earthquakes, they were like major events. But this is not the only problem that we are facing. We are also located in what is called the hurricane belt. So each and every year we are potentially we can be potentially hit by an hurricane. So earthquakes, hurricane, other problems also related to the fact that our environment is very degraded. So we are what we will call like a country that is multiple hazard prone. So the problem is like very much more complex than the earthquake that we are seeing here. So if I want to go back a little bit to the earthquake that we have just seen, what we are seeing here is the result of like poor construction because of what? Not because the people didn't want to have like a better place to live, but just because they do not have like the financial means of building better or building safer. And here what we are seeing here is major destruction on the mountain flanks, which normally should not be a place where people would be like building because of the instability that we have in the slope of the mountains. But the problem in the capital was that many people from other cities around the country, they were coming to Port-au-Prince in order like to find a job or in order like to get an education. Myself, I'm not from Port-au-Prince, and I was living in Port-au-Prince because that was the only place like I could get an education. And I was not the only one. There are many other like people that I know who are living in Port-au-Prince just for the same reasons. And even like to get a job, as I was saying, you have to be in Port-au-Prince. So there was like a major concentration of population in that area. And because of that major concentration of population and the fact that the buildings were so poorly constructed, so this can explain a little bit why we are seeing a death toll that is so high. But the earthquake itself, if it didn't like hit like in what I call the vital points of the country, has not left my country so crippled right after. What has happened is that we have been touched in each and every single area possible. What you are seeing here is a school. That's just one of the schools like around Port-au-Prince that has been destroyed. And there are so many schools destroyed, it's virtually impossible to imagine how the students are going to school right now. What you're seeing here is an historical landmark. So this is, back home we are very attached to our history. So whenever we are seeing this type of damage, like to an historical landmark, this is very affecting to the people. It's like the culture itself, the history itself of the country is affected too. This is the National Palace. Many of you have seen this picture before. So the government itself has been hit. So if we are just like thinking of what I have shown already, the education sector is concerned, the historical aspect is concerned, the government also was touched, and even like the private sector in the country. What I'm showing you is a picture of one of the buildings of one of the banks that we have in the country. So everybody is affected. This is simply giving you just a snapshot of the actual situation. Those pictures are not telling the whole story because it's much more. I mean, the effects of the earthquakes are much more widespread than what I can see just by a few pictures. I can show just by a few pictures. But at the same time, I think if we want to build better, like in the future, in order like to take our vulnerability into account, we have to look inside the country at what has been done and that is still working. For instance, one of the elements that I'm looking into myself was some sort of construction that we had in the country before. They were very lightweight construction, but very artistic construction also. This is what we call the gingerbread houses. Right after the earthquake, many of them, they were not as affected as the other type of construction that we had before. So I was thinking maybe this is a point where this is a starting point, like we can just go and look at how they were built. Why did they withstand the earthquake, and how we can use some of the elements that they integrate architecturally in order like to move forward and try to design a better type of construction. That's just one example. There are other things that we need to consider also. Obviously, we have to look at other solutions that have been implemented, like in other areas that are exposed to earthquake. And some of those solutions, they are working, and we can just see how to integrate them. But the major problem is going to be how to do this in a cost-effective way. And so far, I don't think anybody has like a clear-cut, a clear-cut solution to that. We do not have like a definitive answer to that. And I think this meeting tonight is going to help us like move like toward like getting a better picture, to a better answer to that question. And just a few other like pictures just to show you how artistic this type of construction are. This is actually one of the construction in Port-au-Prince, the gingerbread house that I'm telling you about. And there are some features here, like from an earthquake engineering point of view, that I can see as being like very helpful already. You can see here we have like some bracing right there. You have some of the bracing like in this construction. And one of the things you can see also is that this construction appears to be very lightweight, because in earthquake, when you have like very massive construction, the likelihood of having casualties after one of those construction failing is very high. So this is light. We have the bracing which can resist the lateral movement that we are going to see in earthquake. When the ground is shaking, what is happening basically, the construction tends like to be moving with the ground, and the ones that are not like properly designed, they are going to collapse. And if we have like bracing, like the one that we are seeing here, they tend to resist the lateral movement, the lateral deformation, and by resisting the lateral deformation, they help those buildings withstand the earthquake loading. So this is really a snapshot. It's very difficult like to just talk like in terms of like earthquake and engineering like everything back home like against earthquake, against all the other hazards. But those are just thoughts that I was having. But what we need to have in mind is that the situation is very difficult right now. Very difficult for the reasons I have mentioned. Government-wise, it's very dysfunctional. Education-wise, the people, they are not going to school. I mean, the students, they cannot go to school. In terms of like health, it's very difficult because many of the health facilities have been destroyed. Even like in religion-wise also, because we are very religious people, even though like what people know about my country is they say, voodoo, but it's not only about voodoo. There are so many people like who are very religious who we like to worship, and the churches also, they have been destroyed. So the picture is very complex, but it's very important to have this background, because we cannot just go and say, okay, we are going to borrow the word to borrow your word. We cannot just go and say, okay, we are going to lift some solutions. We have to look at what we have inside, look at the cultural aspect, the social aspect, before we can go in and do a better job than we have been seeing for the last few weeks. So thank you.
I think what we saw there was a country in crisis and a huge amount of damage being done. I guess Jerry is the one person who, and along with Anna, hasn't had a chance to say much here. I'd love to ask you your thoughts about this and your thoughts about what the situation is there.
Thanks, Chris. I think one of the perspectives that I would add is when we're looking at design or enhancing services or opportunities to help people who've survived disaster or armed conflict in the world, we're talking about enormous populations. Just in the Haiti example, we have over 1 million people who are without shelter or who are homeless, who are right now sleeping out in the open. So it's a problem of such scale that innovation alone is not enough. And despite the generosity that's happened so far to help Haiti, it really won't be very much when in fact Haiti is probably looking at a decade of rehabilitation. But we're looking at a very small biopsy of what's happening in the world at large. There's 42 million refugees and displaced people around the world right now that are uprooted from their homes, that are living in makeshift shelter, that are dependent on foreign aid agencies and some very incapable governments to help them. And this doesn't even include the 10 million or so people around the world who are displaced from development projects, dams, reservoirs, irrigation projects. So part of what I'm daunted by is the sheer scale and magnitude of what's happening around the world. I think although the Haiti crisis will get a generous response, other crises that haven't captured the public's imagination the way Haiti has are so underfunded, and the amount of resources available per survivor in these places around the world is very disappointing.
So to that point, I mean, what's the process that we need to go through as a society, as a larger world culture, that gets us to a point where we're actually preparing for these things in advance and are dealing with them in a more I hate this word, but in a more routine way? Because what we're doing now is crisis mode, and there must be a better way to approach this. And
right. I think in the example of Haiti, you're looking at a country that had chronic, persistent vulnerabilities before January 12th, before this earthquake happened. The levels of literacy, unemployment. This is a country that had close to 2 million people who were food dependent. It's a tropical country that had 60% of its food imported by donor countries. It was not even growing food for its own people. As I mentioned, this is only a biopsy of a greater problem of global poverty, which, in my opinion, the Western nations, the more prosperous nations, have not fulfilled their obligation in terms of development and foreign assistance. So the chronic, persisting vulnerabilities that exist in these poor countries, when a shock such as this earthquake happens, it becomes devastating. They just don't have the capacity. They're coming from a very low status of human well-being and only being lowered.
Jess, you mentioned earlier that your organization kind of builds capability and has products and facilities that are kind of ready to go. Can you talk a little bit about the sort of short-term goals of your organization for Haiti and what you think the longer-term processes need to be?
Haiti, one of them. In the context of Haiti, we try, as it was mentioned by Jerry, to bring kids back to school. It's not to be the fastest one in Haiti because it has chronicle natural disaster. So it's better to take the time and to look really as what is the best solution, what will be the viable solution for the next 3 years before we will have the time to build a long-term solution. It is not building expectation. That is the first thing that we have to remind. It's not to say, okay, we will help you and the next 2 years is going to be better. It's to assess together what is the situation, where we're going to build schools that could be resistance to earthquake, as Pierre explained, that will be also facing the other natural disasters, but identifying this location and then looking at the best material to have a long-term solution. So for us at the moment is, Pierre mentioned that unfortunately many children are out of school. First of all, there was a dropout. We have to understand that only 50% of the children population that has to go to school were going to school, of which 80% were going to private school. That says a lot about the Minister of Education already, and so how much they were committed. So without going to politics in this, but what we want to do is looking at the situation. We have a lack of teacher at the moment also because we're talking about the children. We have also to bring materials, but also training and building the capacity of the teachers. So what we want to do is take our time. It is difficult to talk about this during what we just saw, with people suffering, being outside and having children not going to school. So we will build temporary schools with tents and then take the time to identify the best suitable location to have an intermediate and then a long-term solution. That is one of our focus in education. We have other health, as it mentioned, with other humanitarian actors, building back dispensaries and hospitals and things like this. So,
Anna, to bring the topic to design, which is I guess why we're here tonight. Can you talk a little bit about the process you've developed on other projects and how you see the issues within Haiti as a driver for how design might help solve some of these problems?
Sure, yeah. I think before I answer or try to answer that question, I feel like I want to serve myself a really big slice of humble pie because I'm not a development or disaster relief expert or kind of an earthquake reconstruction expert. And I haven't been into Haiti in the recent 2 months to kind of look at what's happening. I do want to actually share something because I was in Haiti at a pretty critical moment in the country's history in October of 1994 when Aristide I was there 5 days after Aristide was reinstated by our government. We essentially have treated Haiti, I think, as a virtual colony through its entire history. But in '94, Aristide was the first democratically elected president, was reinstated by our government. And at that time, I was working for Jonathan Demme, who's a film director who has made many definitive documentaries on the history of Haiti. And we were there to do work on a documentary called The Courage and Pain, which was a story around, I feel, the disaster that the Haitian people suffered at the hands of the Tonton Macoutes, who were the military rulers there who would inflict all kinds of torture on people who resisted their rule, like cutting out tongues and cutting off ears and cutting off hands. I mean, it was a pretty shocking time in your country's history. And so I spent some time in the presidential palace, and seeing the picture that you showed us brings quite a shock to my heart because, I was taking the train down from Boston today thinking about that, and when I was in the presidential palace, and I'm going to tie this all back, I promise, there was nothing. There was no furniture. The Tonton Macoutes, before they fled, had completely vandalized the building. They'd taken all the furniture out. Aristide was sleeping on a little futon in a little annex off of his main Oval Office. There was no plumbing infrastructure. They'd taken out the toilets and the wash basins. They pulled out all the light fixtures. And I bring this up and share this with you as an example of the complete lack now of infrastructure of governance. And so we talk about the lack of infrastructure of education, healthcare, communications, technology, roads, sewage, waste management, all of that. I kind of almost, as a working at a design firm now, you step many steps back and look at the kind of root systemic cause of this and say what efforts can go in to actually rebuild that kind of linchpin kind of infrastructure, that the foundational aspect that will allow any robust infrastructure that is developed to actually succeed. I mean, the situation of Haiti over the past 20 years is $4 billion of aid has been pumped into this country, which comprises something like 40% of the national government's budget. Pre-disaster, there are over 10,000 organizations in Haiti that pretty much operate as the de facto government there, providing basic services for the people. So this is a really daunting challenge, and if we think what is design's role in this, I think in the face of disaster, my personal opinion is nothing right now. If only 10 planes can land in the airstrip in Port-au-Prince, and there's a plane filled with doctors from Doctors Without Borders and UNICEF and all these aid organizations, would you want a plane of designers to land? No. However, you're voted off the island. But ultimately, though, is there a large role to play in the reconstruction?
Well, and I think that does bring the point up that there's that the role is perhaps not being on the airplane flying down there right now, but in the process of planning for the future and getting the country back on its feet in a way that allows it to be, to function.
And I think the kind of DNA of designers and design firms, it kind of builds off a lot of what Pierre was talking about really identifying kind of indigenous capacity and resources and amplifying those on the ground. And
well, Jess was mentioning earlier this idea of, and you said to me as we were talking before, that you really love the idea of designers helping to develop those commodities and the kind of way that things are done. Can you illuminate that a little bit?
And I agree, okay, maybe you're not going to fly all to Haiti, but it would be interesting to go. Mm-hmm. The problem of design, and it's really helpful for us, we're using old commodities, it's always the same one. One example is how much in your house you have developed systems. We saw one of the bladders, the basic one is to bring back clean water. In Haiti, in this event, the water was not with high turbidity. What means high turbidity? It's mud. Basically, the water was clear. But we have to chlorinate it. Chlorine is 70% of chemicals, and it's impossible to fly it. So you cannot send directly a plane with a lot of chlorine because it's a dangerous item. So at home, you have also chlorination systems for your water. So it's bringing this technology to us with membranes, with all the system. But the other system that you have, how to chlorinate your swimming pool, is with electricity, and that's not going to work. And that's why it's important for you, when you have an idea, still to go on the spot to see, okay, is my idea related to the systems in place? Because you can have the most beautiful design that really is going to help us, but we're not going to be able to produce it locally, we're not going to be able to maintain it locally, and you have to sometimes go on the spot, maybe not today because somehow you're going to be in the middle of everything and maybe not the most useful person, but there are some added value for innovation. We have many innovation people, colleagues in the field doing monitoring, using mapping systems, using technology to map where the children are, where the boreholes are functioning. As soon as we have a functioning, we map it on Google. If you go today on Google, you will see a lot of information. That is new technology for us also. So it is important to develop things, but then to bring it down and to test it if it's really related to our systems and to the infrastructure we have on the ground.
Jerry, I think you might have a point of view about this idea of designers helping in the process as well. I wanted to give you a chance to talk about that a little bit. And I want to ask Pierre a question.
Chris and I were talking before, and I was a little more cynical about that a design solution should be there. But I think Jess pointed out something that I think is important, that the history of disaster relief is one of paternalism. They're very paternalistic. And in the past, you would be shocked to see just how much it was Western do-gooders giving out things and disaster victims standing in line. And this is very much not considered a best practice in our current state of the art, in the current technology of disaster relief. It's very participatory, and people are in fact helping themselves.
Can you describe that a little more in terms of the difference between the standing in line to what it ought to be?
Right. Sadly, some of the early images in Haiti in particular were of rowdy crowds of young men elbowing each other, and the one with the sharpest elbows got to the front of the line. In disaster relief is a tradition to serve the most vulnerable first, that women, children needed to be taken care of first, and that survivors should not withstand the indignity of standing in line, that their children shouldn't have to watch their parents receiving handouts. This is a very disgraceful and humiliating experience for many people. So it's done with a lot more attention to registering people, telling them a specific time to show up and when to get their supplies. So it's really a change in the way it's done, putting a real premium on the dignity and respect of survivors, but also involving them in the work themselves. When you have a country such as Haiti with a 70% unemployment rate, that really is inexcusable to have high numbers of foreign aid workers there serving. You should be employing large numbers of Haitians themselves in the relief efforts. So this is a real value in the way current relief work is done.
Pierre, I'd like to ask you about, you've spoken on NPR and Wired about why Haiti was so devastated, and I'd like you to kind of, I think you said a bit of it as you talked here, but I'd like you to maybe take us to what needs to happen next and how you see your family and your. By the way, I wanted to, because probably some people are curious about how your family in Haiti are doing. So you might want to talk about that a little bit. Okay. But I'd also then like to have you talk a little bit about what's next and how you think they can help themselves.
Okay. Well, I think before going into that direction, there's one question that was asked before that I want to touch upon a little bit about what could be done in order to help better. And I think it's very important to look locally and to try to develop the local capacity for the people to self-sustenance, but also in terms of intervening in future hazards also. Because we have to put this into context. What has happened is one city, a major city in the country was hit by the earthquake, but there are many other cities that were not hit. And why couldn't those other cities bring any help to the capital, for instance? It's simply because they were not they are not themselves prepared to face those situations, and because of the lack of financial resources and because of the lack of knowledge also about how to come in to do it. So what I do not want to see in the near future that everybody will come inside the country will be giving food, giving tents and stuff like that, and then maybe 3 or 5 years down the line the same thing happen again, because it can happen again, and we have the same situation all over of people coming, giving out food and giving out tents. What I would rather see an effort toward building resilience inside the country, so that when we have all the disaster, we can face those disasters by ourselves. At least at the starting point, we can start, and after that we'll need other people to come in and to help. But at least we can start. And this is one of the things that I wanted to add to this aspect.
I'm sort of curious to ask the kind of disaster experts about that, whether that's something that you've seen actually work in any other country. We had a major disaster with Katrina, and we didn't seem to be able, as the most wealthy, country on the planet, be able to deal with a disaster in our own land. Is that a realistic way to view how people should react to a disaster in their country? And
Well, there's two parts to your question. One is comparing Hurricane Katrina, so saying the most prosperous country in the world, the United States, suffers a catastrophe, and it's a shameful response, a very flat-footed response. But actually what Katrina's lesson was that poor people suffered the most. People of means were somewhat unaffected. It's the same thing after September 11th here in New York City. At one point, the city government was faced with a problem. Are there more attacks going to happen? Where are we going to put the population of Manhattan if our city's under attack? And they started drawing on day one plans to develop refugee camps in Van Cortlandt Park in the Bronx. Now, how many of you here who live in Manhattan would end up in a tent in Van Cortlandt? Probably not many of you. You'd end up with a friend or a relative in Brooklyn or New Jersey, or you'd go home. Very poor people would end up there. So there's a disparity on a disaster-affected population. Most of us of means would survive quite well. To Pierre's point, one of the values in the disaster relief industry is something called disaster risk reduction, that you must have societies prepared for the kind of disasters you anticipate. Haiti is one of the most disaster-prone countries in the world. It suffers a major calamity every 3 years. 2008 had 4 hurricanes in 30 days, destroyed 60% of the country's agriculture. As Jess pointed out, June 1st starts hurricane season again. It runs all the way till November in Haiti. So it doesn't matter what the outside foreign agencies are going to do. It matters what Haitians are going to do. A lot of the TV footage of the Haiti earthquake really emphasized these search and rescue missions of Westerners discovering and pulling people out of rubble. That was such an infinitesimal small number of survivors. The overwhelming majority of people who were rescued in Haiti were rescued by their family members, by church groups, by volunteers who came from all over the country to help. They're the ones that need to be prepared. They're the ones that need to be supported. The most competent response will be a Haitian response.
Yeah. If I can add on this, we have lesson learned. Okay, we're talking about lesson learned, or lesson non-learned sometimes. South America, they have this national disaster management. They're working on risk reduction with communities. You don't hear much about foreign help going to Bolivia, to Ecuador. They have every year hurricanes. They have every year mudslides affecting millions of people. India, one state, 160 million people. I don't know, Jerry, if you have been to India recently, but most of the emergency are managed by their own government. We don't get involved, not much. They have a national disaster authority that is really managing the emergency by themselves. So I really follow what Jay just said. It starts with the government. We, humanitarian actors, we can work on risk reduction. We can be prepared for our own mandates to help children, to help different beneficiaries of affected population, but it starts with the government to work on community level, to work at national level, to have capacity building at each level. Pierre was mentioning the religion, the religious leaders are really important in many countries. It's working with them to build up this competence of facing natural disaster and man-made disaster, but it was needed at the onset.
I just think I want to build off of that. I mean, I think we're talking about there's different times for different types of engagements, and which sounds very obvious, and there's a time to just bring resources, and it's about alleviation, it's about aid, it's about relief. But then I think where design can play a role is in bringing resources to the resourceful, and it's what I think Pierre was talking about a little bit, and some of what Jerry's been talking about, and it's about, I don't know how, UNICEF can mobilize this formidable global machine to focus like a laser on the time that needs to in the critical time, 72 hours, 2 weeks, to just do good work. What is the role design can play in a year, in 2 years, and in 3 years out. And I think maybe an example of conversations we're having at Continuum might be illustrative of how at least we're thinking about this. We've been talking to an organization, it's a very small organization, it's a social enterprise that works in Haiti, delivering RUTF, which is a ready-to-use therapy food product to treat severe malnutrition in children. And it's in the scale of UNICEF or WFP or Red Cross, it's this big. But their second or kind of higher order mission is to not just provide this product, this commodity, but it's to also build sustainable agriculture, develop sustainable agriculture in the country, to source their materials locally, to work with currently 400 farmers, to develop the supply, the production capability. You know, it's bringing the solution as close to the problem as you can, which is, I think, a tenet of designers, and how you can both slowly, and it's a very slow process, and it's an expensive process, and it is a process that requires a social enterprise that has people on fire. I mean, they have so much passion, these people, to build the production capacity internally, and then also thinking about how you can design a really elegant distribution system for this product, which they're working on now.
Yeah, I think that's a key part of it, because actually doing the design of an emergency shelter or a school in a box kind of kit is only as good as how it gets to the place where it's used.
Right.
Just to jump on that one, RUTF is basically peanut butter with vitamins. And the first RUTF that came into Haiti was produced locally in Santo Domingo. So UNICEF and other actors have developed this. We have companies of RUTF producing Ethiopia, Malawi, Mozambique, and everything. This is exactly sustainable production with local material. It's peanut butter. And then they buy vitamins and they mix it. So then we look at conservation. Normally, the one we buy has a shelf life of 2 years. The one they produce locally has only 6 months. So that's where we're trying to help them to have a more sustainable local market and production, and helping out. And yeah, Santo Domingo is one of the examples of a successful story on peanut butter.
I think this idea of design and design helping the process, to Anna's point, and teaching or going into a society to help develop the skills within the society to help themselves, seems to me to be a very logical thing. There was an awful lot that went on in New Orleans where, design was imposed on communities. One of us had a conversation, I'm not remembering now who it was, but we talked about this idea of designing a house or a community center for a community, and the community saying that's not our community. You can't. You designers from out of town are designing this thing, and you're not designing it in a way that would make sense. I was really moved by Pierre's example of vernacular architecture becoming maybe the model for Haiti, and I'd love for you to talk a little more about that.
The basic idea that I was following, talking about that, was to look inside the country of what has already been done and it's working. Because again, there are many other solutions that exist for to design against earthquake or other natural disasters. We can just maybe take them and ship them inside the country, but they are not going to work because in terms of resource, this is going to mobilize a lot of resources that we might not have locally. But if we can come to the point where we can develop the local construction sector in order to look at what we have in terms of construction materials locally, what we have in terms of knowledge in construction locally also, and to use this in developing design that can be helpful in withstanding earthquakes or other natural hazards. That was the type of the line of thinking that I was following in that. And I think it's very important to put emphasis on developing local competency, local capabilities. The reason is simple. If we look at the economy of the country, like more about like 75% of the people being unemployed. And many of those who do have a job, most of the time they are it's just because they are very creative, like in trying like to come up like with new business ideas that they can use in order like to get the money so that they can help the families like on a daily basis. So if we go back to the construction sector, the ideas of like using local resources will be like to develop new jobs also, like to give them the possibility to give my people the possibility to be involved in the reconstruction process, and to somehow owns this reconstruction process is not being seen as receiver only, but as being participant and actors in reconstructing the country.
And I think to build off that point, if we think about what design can maybe bring to this process, or what design students could add to this conversation, I mean, it's a kind of slight shift in mindset to, design as creator of another cook stove or another small acreage irrigation pump or another device, and to be able to do what, I don't know if folks here know, like an organization called Positive Deviance, which looks at the local indigenous, innovations that exist within a community. And then the design challenge there is, how do you develop a plan to promote the adoption of those indigenous innovations? So a great example that I'm sure you guys are familiar with is, so it's a kind of an asset building approach. It's kind of creative problem solving and very community driven. So for a challenge in Vietnam around malnutrition for children, this group went in and identified that in this community there were certain families whose children actually were thriving. They weren't suffering from malnutrition at all, even though they were faced with the exact similar set of conditions and challenges as their neighbor. So they said, what's the delta here? What's different? And they realized through the kind of ethnography, deep observation, understanding, the kind of empathy of living with the people, that they were actually plucking small shrimp and crabs from the rice paddies, grinding them up, and also sweet potato greens, and mixing that into the food that they were feeding their children. And they were feeding them 4 times a day rather than 2 times a day. And just these kind of positively deviant, and I should say that pulling crabs and shrimp from a rice paddy was seen as kind of uncouth socially, not really accepted culturally to do that. So they were doing it kind of deviantly on the sly, but yet it was a positive deviance because it actually assisted in the tackling malnutrition for their children. And so that's not an imported solution, and it's a local one. And how then, if you think of a role of designers in design, it's like the Rural Innovation Network in India exists solely to identify local innovations and amplify them and integrate them and accelerate them. So I think as designers, that's a great shift off of center line for us to really think about the role we could play in this instance. There's always room for creating the next, iPod and things like that. But
we're going to get to a couple of questions, so hold those for a second. But I see Jerry kind of wanting to respond to that.
Something Anna had mentioned, and part of it, I think, underlies the fiction or the narrative of the disaster relief industry, which is a presumption that survivors are helpless.
Yeah.
And they need outside assistance, and it's a shame. And there's also 3 kind of pervading assumptions. All aid is good, one size fits all, and we know what's best. And unfortunately, the aid industry, these are situations that are very difficult to live in. So our staff, it's very rare to have aid workers that have a very long tenure in this industry. So there isn't a lot of institutional memory, and there's a lot of reinventing of the wheel. On one thing you mentioned, Anna, about the localization of the solution, I think is really interesting. In Hurricane Mitch some years ago in Honduras, one of the reactions of generous people around the world was to ship plane loads of clothing to Honduras for the survivors. This was a terrible idea. Unfortunately, one of the main industries in Honduras is the apparel industry. So it really, and we hear this repeatedly, right? Food surplus countries like the United States and some European countries do wheat dumping. They get rid of their excess cereals on poor countries. Sadly, it drives down the prices of commodities and disincentive for farmers to grow things. We saw this in Afghanistan, which, believe it or not, was a grain exporting country up until recently. The massive wheat dumping after 2001 drove the price down so much for locally grown wheat that farmers had to switch to some other more profitable cash crop. This obviously has come back and bitten us. I remember seeing one organization in Chad, working in refugee camps in Chad, building some structures there. Chad is in the geographic center of the Sahara Desert. One of the things they were importing for their construction was sand.
That's incredible.
Bringing coals to Newcastle.
Yeah.
Why don't we take some questions? There are a couple of people with mics out here. Make sure you wait until you get the mic to talk. We're going to start with this young lady right there. Great.
One of the areas I think where design really can help in this case is design for disability. We've got, for the first time in a disaster, approximately, I've heard numbers like 8,000 people who've had limbs amputated. You're talking about a country where, it was not particularly hospitable to these people before the disaster, and now there's very little housing for people to recuperate in, and there's certainly very few level paved surfaces for them to get around. So obviously they need prosthetics, they need wheelchairs, they need whatever they're going to need. But I think this is an area where good design minds in this country and other places could help. And I'd love to see the design community turning their eye to something like that. And then the only other thing I just want to mention is I really do think that architects can step up and help here. I mean, I've seen a couple of competitions where these things have been talked about, but now we're seeing huge scale disasters both in China and here, with schools pancaking, generations of children either losing their lives or losing their education. And there's got to be a better way for the future.
I'd love to hear the perspective of the two of you about this idea of helping people who are affected by amputation. There was a really tragic story this morning in the New York Times about a dancer in Haiti who lost a limb, and her attitude about it was, I'm going to go on, I'm going to figure this out. So you guys have the sort of short-term thing. What's your perspective on
one of the things, International Rescue Committee, we were very involved in the crisis in Bosnia. And the same thing happened. There are large numbers of amputees from landmines. And this is in a country that had no legacy of functional rehabilitation in their mindset of how medical care is brought. Someone who is paraplegic is considered bedbound, unfortunately, in the early 90s. People who worked with these people were called, in Bosnian, defectologists. A name we would go for something more positive, and so so you can see the mindset wasn't there. We got very involved in this. We brought a lot of occupational therapists and physical therapists to Bosnia from the United States to do trainings. The story is quite a happy ending. There are now very rigid construction standards all throughout Bosnia in terms of wheelchair accessible ramps, widened doorways, and countless other building codes that they must meet in Bosnia now. The happy ending to the story is International Rescue Committee just recently sponsored Bosnia's wheelchair basketball team to the Special Olympics.
Great. I think right here there's a question. Got a mic there?
I think this question may be for Jess. I'm wondering whether the commodities and supplies that you're bringing in are being measured in meters and centimeters or in feet and inches. And since I think I probably know the answer, do you then tell the Americans that a lot of the stuff they may want to send may not be as useful, or do you tell the Haitians that they're going to need 2 different screwdrivers?
Great question.
It's a big problem in square meters and volume. We all work with different measurements. We all work with different solutions. It is always the same problem. Voltage is the other problem. We shipped, and we have to face our mistakes, we shipped a lot of prefabs on 220 volts. and it's 110 and 110. So this mistake always going to happen. Universality is never going to happen. So we have to face this problem, and we're getting more and more used to it. But that is exactly the reality when I say, and we have mentioned local culture, understanding how it happens. So, and not rushing into solutions, but having an understanding of the culture to help them to find a solution that will be the most sustainable and that will be maintainable locally. And the solution, the States is the only one using this kind of references.
Back here, and then we'll go over to this man. So right here first.
Hi, I should actually state I work with Jerry at the International Rescue Committee, and one of my favorite. Sorry, and this is actually not a canned question, so I'm sorry, Jerry, if this is. But one of my favorite stories that I've heard was, or from the field, was I can't remember if it was Darfur or Congo, but we were having trouble with our radios getting stolen. And one of the really simple solutions that our workers came up with was, okay, it's men and boys that are stealing the radio, let's paint them pink. And they stopped getting stolen.
Design solution.
Yeah, I mean, what a wonderful design. And so I'm
Jess,
wondering
I
if you
think,
guys
has
have
a
any
similar story.
simple examples of simple design. Yeah, they stopped stealing the radios. So do you have any other examples of simple solutions that would be sort of enlightening?
One other that's in this is a true story that Katie just mentioned, and by spray painting them all pink, people stopped stealing them. In Chad, IRC Chad had a lot of vehicles stolen by road bandits. We painted them our new distinct logo color, which is this bright taxi cab yellow. Most vehicles in Chad are white, so that worked. In West Africa, in Liberia, the militias were stealing from our convoys of high-protein biscuits that we're bringing to the camps. Our staff simply relabeled the biscuits women's biscuits, and it seemed to put an end to it.
Yes, do you have a similar
In
story?
the humanitarian world now, you're going to see blue mosquito nets because the white we're using for weddings. And it is as simple as this. It is. They are either green or blue. Next time we're going to see blue marriage. But okay, it is a major problem because we were always seeing the mosquito nets hanging around on the market for other purpose.
So, question right here with the mic, please.
Well, these anecdotes are they're wonderful. Yeah, I mean, in every case, they're terrific problem solving. I'm wondering if anybody knows of any place where this kind of information is codified and made available so it doesn't always have to be invented in the middle of a crisis, because that's basically what most of our anecdotes are about.
Anna's going to take that, and then I'm going to add something.
Yeah,
to
I
it.
mean, I think that's a great issue, a question you raise, and I don't know about in the disaster relief business, but in the design world, there's a site called Appropedia, which is like a wiki for appropriate technology or appropriate solutions, and I don't know how kind of robust or effective it is, but it's trying to address the challenge that you just raised, which is how do you not go in and this notion of you got to relearn, reinvent the wheel. So it's a kind of open source wiki that's trying to gather and manage that knowledge, which is valuable knowledge. The story you shared and the story you shared. I mean, they seem so small, but it's so powerful. So that's one I know of.
Yeah, at the Aspen summit that Anna and I attended a few months ago, one of the projects that was worked on was about Hale County, Alabama, which has a bunch of issues. But one of the things that we came to was a conclusion about developing an online capability to make sure that we weren't relearning and relearning and relearning. Mm-hmm. Every time we went to a different place. So it was about building this repository of information. And I hadn't heard of the one you talked about, but it's a valuable process.
In the humanitarian work, 2005 was a turn to a lot of competition between humanitarian actors. Jerry mentioned industry. I would never use that word, but okay, it's, I think, a humanitarian world organization. We came in two clusters. So we had the health cluster, we have the shelter cluster. It's a group of organizations that have the same mandate or the same activities. and there's a cluster leader. RUTF is one of the outcome of the nutrition cluster. Everybody came together and said, what is the solution to severe malnutrition? We had Unimix, which is like corn soja blend with a little bit of vitamins that you add with oil and with milk, and then you have a premix. It's like your Quaker that you give to your children in the morning. So we came together and we said, what is the sustainable solution? And you see more and more of this initiative into clusters. Like the logistic cluster, how can we maximize shipping? How can we find new ways of moving goods and things like this? So it happens. It's not at the industrial level, but it's at our level. But that has a concept.
Interagency? So
you're
working with different agencies?
It is inter-humanitarian actors. Not only UN, international NGOs, local NGOs, everybody's welcome. And we are working to find solutions together. One of these that has consequence to the industrial work and commercial companies. At a certain moment, we all came together and we said, okay, the plastic sheeting. Plastic sheeting is a 4x5 meter sheet that you use for shelter, that you use for tarpaulin on the ground. You have multi-purpose. We wanted to make it better because it's a shade for the family, but it also doesn't have to catch the heat of the sun. But also at night, it has to catch to keep this heat. Mm-hmm. We went to a process analyzing all together. We analyzed what would be the best product. At that year, all the companies started to get out to release their stocks and not producing anything, waiting for this new product. And it was a mix of humanitarian actors facing problems, bringing to commercial, to the designers to say, that's what we need. And then all the industry slowed down for a while. This new product came, and all the industry took that new product and released that product. The same thing for mosquito nets. Before we had mosquito nets, and we had the chemicals to impregnate the mosquito nets. Now we have mosquito nets pre-impregnated. We're going now for tents that are pre-impregnated. So we have a market shaping power, and we are using it for the purpose of the beneficiaries. Mm-hmm. We are not ashamed of this.
Mm-hmm. That's correct.
Toyota, the model of Toyota is not a commercial. We are talking about the ambulance, not the Land Cruiser that you see in LA on Beverly Hills and things like this. It's a useful ambulance. Toyota wanted to, it's a little bit sad to talk about Toyota now, they're facing problems, but they will recover the problems, I hope, because we need them. And at a certain moment, everybody, all the NGOs and humanitarian actors are using this same model because you just use kosher and it's clean inside, there's nothing, it's just vinyl and things like this. They wanted to stop the model. And we all came together and we said, okay, every year we're buying thousands and thousands and thousands of that model. But by the way, the gear is not working well. By the way, the springs are not really working well. They improved and then they still produce it. So we have, when we all come together, the humanitarian world is a powerful world, and we're trying to improve our commodities for the good reason.
Is there a network for that? Is there a way that happens? And I work for Johnson & Johnson, and the logic of what we end up giving in humanitarian aid is probably more about what we produce for regular use. And I am sure that there would be an interest in developing products in the right way. Is there a network for that?
That community is the humanitarian community was really distant. It has changed. We are getting closer to the military technology. We are going closer to the commercial technology, and the forum is open. We have more and more of this forum. We have Aspen. We have in Europe. We have a couple. During the common days, we have commercial companies coming and say, okay, for example, one to not name it, UPS has a technology of shipping that we don't have. We are interested. They don't bring us plane. They bring us technology of mapping, of following commodities and things like this. So we are using them, it's a word like this, it's using them for the best purpose. And they are more and more interested, sometimes for image, but also for doing good. One of the examples is Fritz. The Fritz Foundation it's a previous owner of one of the department of UPS. Yeah. He sold his company to UPS, and he started to be interested in developing logistics in the humanitarian world. And he helped us a lot. And since then, we have a certification for logistics, we have networking, we have access to things we didn't have before. So the distance has been reduced. And we are more and more open to talk with commercial networks.
Yeah, it seems like that's an outcome that needs to be driven by a larger good and develop not as happenstance but as larger logic. Yeah. We have other questions. Yeah. Hold on. Hold on. Let me get you a microphone. There you go. Right behind you.
The question of land redistribution. It occurs to me that Haiti is governed. Real property law comes down through the Napoleonic Code, rather than in the West, which comes down through an Anglo-Saxon code. And I would think it would be something that needs to be understood before the designers plunge in and begin designing.
Pierre, do you know a bit about that?
Well, I understand what you're saying, and it is true. But the aspect that we have to consider is that this could be a big problem if, in the future, we are going to have wide-scale housing project, for instance, that is going to mobilize like vast areas of land. But to my sense, it is quite unlikely at this phase. What I'm seeing much more likely the people are going back into what we call like auto construction. So basically, we still have like a separation of the lands. Each person is going to have like his own piece of land where he or she can build his or her own house. So this is the type of thing that we are going to see, and it is very difficult to say this is going to be a very big problem. You know what I mean? To say the fact that we have the Napoleonic Code. I'm sorry, but the fact that the codes are different, like from the one that we have that you have in the US, for instance, it's not going to have like a very big impact, unless that we are going to the situation where we have like big scale construction project, like you have a company coming into the country and say, okay, we are going to have housing projects like on this area of land, and at that time we are going to need the government to intervene and say, okay, I can give you that part of the land in order like to do the construction. But this is not the case right now. The case is the people, they each try to get like a piece of land, and the piece of land that they have, they are going to build their own house on. And what we want to do is to introduce at least some regulation at that level to see to tell them what you can build, and how to build them so that you make sure that you have a house that is earthquake or hazard resistant. But I do not see this as the biggest concern right now.
I think we have time for one more.
So I think it's a problem. I think it's a problem.
I think the things that Perry just mentioned are things that I think people are concerned with, that a lot of people are licking their chops to say, wow, this is a great opportunity to have the widespread project and to really take from other cultures and other countries to say the way that it should be built is to have some big multinational come in with steel and do it earthquake resistant. And what I think as designers, this discussion and others being centered here in the Cooper Hewitt National Design Museum is very important. But I think also in terms of getting people involved in this process, maybe not people who are just, well, maybe just designers, but one of the things that we have benefit by being here in New York is that we have a huge Haitian American population. I know like 5 or 6 Haitian Americans who are architects and engineers who can help or work with other designers in this city and maybe from other places to work out some of the details about what the construction is and how it relates to the people there, because they have families there
I
and
think
they
that's a great
understand
idea.
the culture.
You want to
But
respond to that?
to be able to bring those people together with designers to come up with solutions in the country right now, there's not the infrastructure to work that out in the universities, but to do it more hands-on, and there are a lot of designers who might want to go there now, but can start working on things that can, once the building starts, or to come up with other ways or construction materials or whatever. So I'd like to see how this panel, and knowing what you do in relief, how that can be done and how Cooper Hewitt can facilitate a lot of that.
I agree with you. As a matter of fact, I would take it one step further and say that the part of the puzzle that's missing from our whole discussion is the recipients of aid themselves. Nowhere in the process are they consulted or involved. Is the beneficiary population surveyed to say, what is it you need? How can we innovate? And this is, as I mentioned, part of the culture of paternalism that Western countries have toward countries in crisis. The largest aid recipient, disaster and conflict aid recipient in the world is Islamic. They have a very different system and codes of separation and gender apartheid, if you would, of separation. This is something that's not looked at. Still the traditional tent styles and makeshift shelters that are offered in crises around the world don't pay attention to this. And it was tragic to see that this summer in Pakistan, millions of displaced Pakistan women who were not allowed to go out, had no covered areas for bathing, and the incidence of lice, scabies, and fungal skin infections among Pakistani women was extraordinary. But they couldn't even leave their home to go to a clinic because there were no female practitioners. So although good ideas and innovation of medical research were happening, we weren't consulting the very people we were helping in terms of what they really need.
Yes.
Just on the construction part, working with the population is definitely an added value, but don't take out the government. Each government, each ministry, education, Minister of Health, has their own architecture department. It is a moment, we have this rare opportunity, some people say to build good. I think it's to rebuild because the country was existing before. So to take the opportunity to look at child-friendly spaces, schools that are better built, earthquake sensitive, but also more adequate to the new situation, and also better studied for children. The same thing for hospitals, for dispensaries. And taking this experience of the local culture with the new innovations and helping the government to have new standards on these governmental buildings, schools, hospitals, dispensaries, and others. So this is exactly one of the opportunity we have now after the earthquake.
Maybe just to add something to that, I think this is about developing what we call lifelines, because those elements that you have mentioned, like hospitals, like infrastructures, they are part of the lifelines, and those are critical infrastructures that we need to look into what has been done like elsewhere to appropriate whatever has been done elsewhere to the local reality that we have. Then this is a very, very important element, like to take into account, to have them not only earthquake resistant, but also like in a general sense hazard resistance, because again we know that we are exposed to hurricanes and other occurrences of natural hazards. This is a very important element, I think.
I think we could go on for a while here, but I think our hosts have been very kind and generous to have us here tonight, and I think the Cooper Hewitt has a role that can continue here, and I'm sure that Carolyn will take that back in the process. I want to thank the four of you. You've been very interesting and helpful, and thank you all for coming.